It has often occurred to me that there exists no more dangerous combination than obsession coupled with wealth. The wealthy man may indulge his peculiarities without restraint, nurturing them until they grow into something far more sinister than mere eccentricity. I had occasion to reflect upon this observation during that memorable weekend in March of 1934, when Hercule Poirot and I found ourselves guests at Thornfield Manor, the Devonshire estate of Sir Alister Pembroke Thorne. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday morning, written in the precise copper-plate hand that I had learned to associate with the English upper classes. Sir Alister requested the pleasure of our company for his annual orchid exhibition, an event that had become something of a legend among botanical enthusiasts throughout the empire. "You observe, Hastings," Poirot had remarked, examining the heavy cream paper with its embossed crest, "that our host does not merely invite us to view his collection. No, he speaks of his life's work and mentions a matter of some delicacy that requires my attention. Already the little grey cells, they begin to stir. Surely you don't suspect trouble at a flower show, Poirot?" My friend had smiled that enigmatic smile of his, the one that invariably preceded our most challenging cases. "Mon ami, wherever there is passion, and make no mistake, the collecting of rare orchids is a passion most consuming, there is the potential for jealousy, for rivalry, for deception. And where these emotions flourish, murder is never far behind." How prophetic those words would prove to be. The manor and its master. Thornfield Manor rose from the Devon countryside like something from a Gothic romance, its grey stone walls softened by climbing roses and the gentle mist that seemed perpetually to drift across the moors. The house itself dated from the 16th century, though Sir Alister had made extensive modifications to accommodate his botanical pursuits. The most striking of these was the Orchid Room, a magnificent glass conservatory that extended from the manor's east wing like a crystalline jewel. Sir Alister Pembroke Thorne was a man of 62 years, tall and spare, with the pale complexion of one who spent more time among his plants than in society. His grey eyes held an intensity that spoke of absolute dedication to his chosen field, and when he spoke of his orchids, which he did frequently, since his voice took on an almost reverent quality. "Gentlemen," he said as he led us through the conservatory on that first afternoon, "you are looking upon the finest private orchid collection in Europe. Some of these specimens cannot be found anywhere else in the world. They represent 30 years of careful cultivation, of expeditions to the most remote corners of the globe, of patience that would try the soul of Job himself." The Orchid Room was indeed a marvel. The air hung thick and warm, heavy with moisture and the intoxicating perfume of countless blooms. Rows upon rows of the exotic flowers stretched before us in a riot of color and form, some delicate as butterflies, others bold and architectural in their strange beauty. At the room's center, beneath a special glass dome, grew what Sir Alister proudly proclaimed to be his masterpiece. A hybrid of his own creation, the Pembroke Blue, with petals of such an ethereal azure that they seemed to glow with their own inner light. "Magnificent," Poirot murmured, though I noticed his attention was not entirely focused on the flowers. His sharp eyes were cataloguing the room's layout, noting the 2 entrances, the placement of the heating apparatus, the arrangement of the growing benches. "And this room, it is always kept locked?" "Always," Sir Alister replied firmly. "The temperature and humidity must be precisely controlled. Even the slightest fluctuation could damage specimens that have taken years to cultivate. Only myself, my head gardener Griggs, and my secretary Miss Hartwell possess keys." The gathering storm. The other guests had arrived throughout the day, and by evening we had assembled in the drawing room for what proved to be a most illuminating dinner party. It became clear that Sir Alister's passion for orchids had created a web of relationships, both complex and potentially dangerous. There was Lady Pembroke Thorne, Sir Alister's wife of 25 years, a handsome woman whose brittle smile suggested years of competing with flowers for her husband's affection. She spoke little during dinner, but I observed her watching her husband with an expression I found difficult to interpret. Mr. Julian Pembroke Thorne, the couple's only son, was a young man of 28, whose dissipated appearance spoke of too much champagne and too little purpose. And he had been sent down from Cambridge some years earlier, and had since devoted himself to what he termed the pursuit of pleasure. His relationship with his father was clearly strained, their conversation limited to terse exchanges about Julian's allowance and his mounting debts. Miss Evelyn Hartwell, Sir Alister's private secretary, was a woman of perhaps 35 years, plain but efficient, who had devoted the past decade to managing her employer's correspondence and botanical records. She spoke of the orchids with an enthusiasm that seemed to exceed even professional dedication, and I noticed that Sir Alister relied upon her judgment in matters concerning his collection. Dr. Marcus Thornbury, a distinguished botanist from the Royal Horticultural Society, had been invited to authenticate several of Sir Alister's rarer specimens. Though he was a man of science, precise in his observations and methodical in his approach, yet I detected an underlying tension in his manner when the conversation turned to certain aspects of orchid cultivation. Finally, there was Mr. Geoffrey Blackwood, a neighbouring landowner whose own modest orchid collection had apparently been a source of friendly rivalry with Sir Alister for many years. Blackwood was a bluff, hearty man who seemed to take his defeats in the local flower shows with good grace, though I noticed his jaw tighten when Sir Alister spoke of his recent acquisition of a rare Paphiopedilum specimen. Seeds of conflict. As the evening progressed, it became apparent that beneath the civilized veneer of polite conversation, currents of resentment and jealousy ran deep. The first hint of trouble came when Dr. Thornbury, examining Sir Alister's records of recent acquisitions, raised questions about the provenance of several specimens. "I must say, Sir Alister," he remarked, adjusting his spectacles as he studied a particular entry, "some of these acquisition dates seem rather optimistic. The Dendrobium nobile variety you claim to have obtained last spring was, to my knowledge, still in the collection of Lord Ashworth at that time." Sir Alister's face flushed. "I resent the implication, Thornbury. My records are meticulous, and my sources are beyond reproach." Of course," Dr. Thornbury replied smoothly. "I merely seek to ensure accuracy for the Society's records. We wouldn't want any irregularities to come to light." The tension in the room was palpable. Julian seized the opportunity to refill his glass, and while Lady Pembroke Thorne's knuckles whitened as she gripped her napkin, Miss Hartwell looked as though she wished to disappear entirely. It was then that Mr. Blackwood made his unfortunate contribution to the conversation. "Speaking of acquisitions," he said with a forced joviality that fooled no one, "I don't suppose you'd consider parting with that Pembroke blue of yours, Alister. I'd be willing to make quite a generous offer." The silence that followed was deafening. Sir Alister rose slowly from his chair, his face white with fury. "That specimen," he said in a voice like ice, "is not for sale. It will never be for sale. It represents the culmination of my life's work, and I would sooner see it destroyed than allow it to fall into unworthy hands." The fatal night, the party retired early, of the evening's tensions having dampened any inclination for further socializing. Sir Alister announced his intention to check on his orchids before bed, a nightly ritual that no one found unusual. He was last seen entering the Orchid Room at approximately 10:30, carrying with him a glass of his customary evening brandy. What happened next would remain a mystery until Poirot's brilliant deductions brought the truth to light. I was awakened the following morning by a commotion in the corridor outside my room. Hastily donning my dressing gown, I emerged to find the household in a state of considerable agitation. Mrs. Meadows, the housekeeper, stood wringing her hands, while Griggs, the head gardener, spoke in urgent, hushed tones to Lady Pembroke Thorne. "What has happened?" I inquired. "It's Sir Alister, sir," Mrs. Meadows replied. replied, her voice trembling. "He's in the Orchid Room and he won't answer when we call. The doors are locked from the inside, sir, and we can't get in." Poirot appeared at that moment, fully dressed despite the early hour, his usually immaculate appearance suggesting he had been awake for some time. "Mes amis," he said quietly, "I fear we must prepare ourselves for the worst. Lead us to this Orchid Room, if you please." The discovery, the scene that greeted us in the conservatory, was one I shall never forget. Sir Alistair lay collapsed beside his precious Pembroke blue. The special glass dome that protected it shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments. His face was contorted in an expression of agony, and his right hand clutched at his throat. Near his body lay the brandy glass, empty now, to its contents having soaked into the rich earth of the orchid beds. But it was the state of the Pembroke blue itself that provided the most shocking detail. The magnificent orchid had been torn from its pot, its delicate roots exposed, its ethereal blue petals scattered like fallen tears across the conservatory floor. "Mon Dieu," Poirot breathed, kneeling beside the body. "He has been poisoned, without doubt. But see, Hastings, the orchid, it too has been murdered. This is not the work of a common thief or a crime of simple passion. This is the act of someone who understood exactly how to cause Sir Alistair the maximum possible anguish." I examined the room's 2 entrances. Both were locked from the inside, the keys still in their respective locks. The windows were sealed shut, their mechanisms designed to maintain the precise environmental conditions necessary for the orchid's survival. "But how did the murderer escape?" I asked. "The room was locked from the inside when we found him." Poirot's eyes gleamed with that particular light that always appeared when he encountered a puzzle worthy of his abilities. "Ah, mon ami, that is indeed the question. But first, we must gather our suspects. For I am certain of one thing. Sir Alistair Pembroke Thorne was murdered by someone in this house. Someone who knew his habits, his obsessions, and his vulnerabilities. The killer walks among us still, and it is our task to unmask them before they can strike again." As if summoned by his words, the other members of the household began to arrive, drawn by the commotion. Their faces, as they took in the scene before them, and provided Poirot with his first clues in what would prove to be one of his most challenging cases. The affair at the Orchid Room had begun, and in that perfumed chamber of death, among the exotic blooms that had been Sir Alistair's pride and joy, the seeds of justice would soon take root. Inspector Hartwell arrived within the hour, a stout, practical man whose weathered face suggested more familiarity with poachers than poisoned baronets. He examined the locked conservatory with growing bewilderment, scratching his graying head as Poirot demonstrated the impossibility of escape through the sealed windows. "Suicide, perhaps?" Hartwell ventured, eyeing the scattered orchid petals with distaste. "Man destroys his life's work in a fit of madness, then takes the poison himself." "Said possible," Poirot conceded diplomatically, though his eyes danced with gentle mockery. "Yet observe the position of the body, the angle of the fall, and consider, why lock both doors from within, destroy one's masterpiece, then sit calmly to drink brandy?" The household assembled in the morning room while photographers worked. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations and the heavy scent of hothouse flowers that seemed to follow them from the conservatory. Lady Pembroke Thorne sat rigidly by the window, dabbing at dry ice with lace. Julian paced before the fireplace, a cigarette trembling between stained fingers. Miss Hartwell clutched her notebook like a shield, while Dr. Thornbury polished his spectacles with clinical detachment. Geoffrey Blackwood stood apart, his earlier joviality entirely vanished. Poirot positioned himself before the marble mantelpiece, his small figure somehow dominating the room through sheer presence. "Mes amis," he began quietly, "Sir Alistair has been murdered. The poison was swift. Cyanide, I believe Dr. Thornbury detected the telltale scent. But this killer sought not merely death, but the destruction of what the victim treasured most. Each of you was under this roof. Each possessed opportunity. Now you will account for your movements. The questioning began methodically. Lady Pembroke Thorne claimed she had retired at 11, taking her customary sleeping draught. "My husband seemed disturbed at dinner," she admitted. "He spoke of professional jealousy, of Locke's being for the honest. He feared someone coveted the Pembroke blue." Julian's alibi was shakier. "I went to the village pub after our disagreement about money. Returned past midnight. Rather the worse for drink. Henderson, the butler, heard me stumble upstairs. Miss Hartwell had worked late in the library, organizing correspondence until nearly midnight. I heard nothing unusual from my room above the conservatory. Dr. Thornbury claimed he had been reading botanical journals until well past midnight. I took a sleeping draught at 11. Heard nothing, saw no one." Blackwood insisted he had walked the moors to clear his head after the uncomfortable dinner. "I may have coveted that extraordinary orchid, but I'd never poison a man for it." "Très intéressant," Poirot murmured, steepling his fingers. 5 suspects, 5 alibis, none properly verified. The killer is clever, but not clever enough." He rose with characteristic precision. "Now we shall examine the scene once more, for there, as among the shattered glass and murdered flowers, lies the key to this mystery." The psychological game had truly begun. The Orchid Room in the cold light of morning resembled a tropical paradise violated by death. Moisture beaded on the glass walls while the heating apparatus hummed its mechanical lullaby, indifferent to the tragedy it had witnessed. Poirot moved through the humid space with balletic precision, his patent leather shoes clicking softly against the tiles. "You observe, Hastings," he murmured, kneeling beside the shattered dome, "how the glass fragments scatter outward, not inward. The destruction came from within. But was it Sir Alistair's dying convulsion, or something more deliberate?" He examined the murdered orchid with his magnifying glass. "See here, each root severed with precision, not torn in panic. Now this required time, deliberation. The killer understood that destroying the Pembroke blue would wound Sir Alistair more deeply than mere death." Inspector Hartwell worked methodically nearby, directing the photographer. Near the heating pipes stood a row of brown bottles, neatly labeled in Miss Hartwell's precise hand. Fertilizer, fungicide, insect wash, and, significantly, cyanide solution. "There's your poison," Hartwell announced. "Any of them could have slipped it into his brandy." Poirot lifted the cyanide bottle delicately. Unlike its fellows, which bore the crusted residue of garden work, this one gleamed as though recently polished. "Someone has wiped this clean within hours," he observed, "not the act of an innocent man." A commotion outside interrupted his examination. Young Constable Morrison emerged from the rhododendrons, but holding a small object wrapped in his handkerchief. "Found this beneath the ventilation grate, sir," he announced breathlessly. It was a tarnished silver key, its fob engraved with tiny script. Hartwell examined it closely, then tested it in the conservatory lock. It turned smoothly. A 4th key. The victim said only 3 existed. He squinted at the engraving. G. Blackwood. We returned to the morning room where the assembled suspects waited in tense silence. Hartwell held the key aloft like a trophy. "Mr. Blackwood," he declared, "this key was found outside the murder scene, yet you claim to have no access to the conservatory." Geoffrey Blackwood leaped to his feet, his face purpling. "That's impossible. I haven't seen that key in 10 years. Alistair gave it to me when we were partners, before our disagreement. And I lost it ages ago." "How convenient," Lady Pembroke Thorne observed icily. "You always resented Alistair's success." "The motive is clear," Hartwell continued. "Jealousy over the orchid collection, opportunity provided by your lost key, and means readily available in the conservatory itself." Julian stubbed out his cigarette with obvious relief. "Thank God that's settled." "Take Mr. Blackwood into custody," Hartwell ordered. As the protesting man was led away, the others relaxed visibly, believing their ordeal concluded. Only Poirot remained troubled. He watched Blackwood's departure with a frown, then turned his penetrating gaze back toward the conservatory. "No," he whispered to me. "Too simple, too convenient. The evidence falls into place like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. But puzzles can be manufactured, Hastings. Someone wishes us to believe in Mr. Blackwood's guilt. The question is, who benefits from this deception?" The little grey cells were working furiously now. The arrest of Geoffrey Blackwood cast a deceptive calm over Thornfield Manor, yet Poirot observed how quickly the remaining suspects shed their masks of grief. That evening, he insisted upon dining with the household despite their obvious desire for solitude. "Mes amis," Poirot began, dabbing his moustache delicately as Lady Pembroke Thorne presided with renewed composure, "I find myself troubled by certain inconsistencies. The police are satisfied, yet the little grey cells, they refuse to rest." Julian attacked his roast beef with renewed appetite. "Surely the matter is settled. Blackwood had motive, means, and that damning key." "Ah, but consider the psychology," Poirot mused. "Why would a man destroy the very object of his desire? If Mr. Blackwood coveted the Pembroke blue, surely he would steal it, not slaughter it." Dr. Thornbury adjusted his spectacles. "Perhaps spite. If I cannot have it, no one shall." "Précisément what the killer wishes us to believe," Poirot replied. "Yet I have discovered something most interesting. The conservatory logs show the temperature controls were manually adjusted at 10:15 p.m., 15 minutes before Sir Alister entered." Miss Hartwell's fork clattered. "Adjusted how?" "Lowered significantly. Enough to stress the delicate blooms, forcing Sir Alister to spend time correcting the damage. A trap requiring intimate knowledge of orchid cultivation." The silence was profound. Poirot continued his gentle assault. "Lady Pembroke Thorne, your husband refused Julian money that evening. How much was required?" £5,000, Julian muttered, his earlier confidence evaporating. "Gambling debts. Father said I could rot in debtor's prison first. And you, Miss Hartwell, 10 years of devoted service, yet your name appears nowhere in Sir Alister's published papers." Her hands trembled. "He promised, when the Pembroke Blue won the Royal Horticultural Medal, my contribution would be acknowledged. Last week, he informed me he'd decided against it, said it would complicate matters. Dr. Thornbury, when you questioned those acquisition records, you suspected forgery, did you not?" The botanist's professional mask slipped. Several specimens bore characteristics suggesting English cultivation, not South American origin. If proven, it would destroy Sir Alister's reputation. Poirot rose with theatrical precision. "Each of you possessed motive. Financial desperation, professional betrayal, academic rivalry, marital resentment. Yet you accept Mr. Blackwood's guilt with remarkable alacrity. Why? Because it absolves you." He paused at the doorway, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The true murderer sits at this table. They understood Sir Alister's habits, his devotion to his orchids, his nightly ritual. They knew exactly how to lure him into their trap. And they are far cleverer than they realize, but not perhaps quite clever enough." The psychological net was tightening. Dawn crept reluctantly across the Devon moors, bringing with it a mist so thick it seemed to muffle not only sound, but thought itself. Thornfield Manor brooded beneath its grey shroud, and the very stones seeming to absorb the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over the household since Poirot's pointed observations at dinner. I found my friend already dressed and alert in the library, surrounded by Sir Alister's correspondence. The weak morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the scattered papers. "Bon matin, Hastings," he greeted me without looking up. "I have made a most interesting discovery in our late host's private papers." He held up 3 typewritten notes, each brief and menacing. your secrets will be exposed. The Pembroke Blue is built on lies. Justice comes for thieves. Threatening letters. I examined them closely. When were these received? Within the fortnight before his death. Each typed on the same machine, the Remington in Sir Alister's own study. Someone in this household composed these, mon ami, someone who had intimate access and knowledge of his affairs. The implications were chilling. Before I could respond, a piercing scream shattered the morning quiet. The discovery. We rushed toward the sound, finding Mrs. Meadows collapsed outside the conservatory doors, her face white with shock. Through the glass walls, we could see a figure sprawled among the orchid benches. Miss Evelyn Hartwell lay motionless beside the shattered remains of the Pembroke Blue's display case, her body twisted in the same agonized position we had witnessed 2 days prior. An overturned teacup lay near her outstretched hand, its contents staining the pristine tiles, while the sweet scent of almonds hung heavy in the humid air. Mon Dieu, Poirot breathed, kneeling beside the body. Oh, cyanide again, but observe, Hastings. Clutched in her fingers is Sir Alister's private cultivation journal, the very one she claimed yesterday was missing from his papers. Dr. Thornbury arrived within minutes, his professional composure intact despite the horror of the scene. The same poison, the same method, he confirmed grimly. But she's been dead less than an hour. Inspector Hartwell burst through the conservatory doors, his earlier confidence completely shattered. Blackwood's been in custody all night. He couldn't have done this. His voice cracked with the realization that his case had crumbled entirely. The journal's revelation. Poirot examined the leather-bound journal with meticulous care, his sharp eyes scanning the precise entries that documented 30 years of botanical obsession. Page after page revealed detailed records of hybridization attempts, acquisition dates, and growing conditions. But it was the marginalia that proved most damning. Notes about creative provenance and enhanced documentation written in Sir Alister's own hand. Voilà, Poirot murmured, pointing to a series of entries. Here we see the truth that cost Miss Hartwell her life. Several of Sir Alister's most prized specimens were not the rare South American varieties he claimed, but clever hybrids created in English greenhouses. The provenance documents were forgeries, the exotic origins fabricated. Lady Pembroke Thorne appeared in the doorway, her usual composure finally cracking under the weight of events. "Evelyn came to me last night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was terribly agitated. Said she had discovered who killed Alister and that she had proof. I begged her to go directly to the police, but she insisted on confronting the killer first. "And did she name this person?" Poirot asked gently. "No, she wouldn't say. Only that the journal would reveal everything and that the truth was hidden in plain sight among the flowers." Julian stumbled into the conservatory, reeking of spirits despite the early hour. "This is madness," he cried. "First father, now Evelyn. Are we all to be murdered in our beds?" Poirot's deduction. Poirot rose slowly, his eyes taking on that particular gleam that always preceded his most brilliant insights. "The killer grows desperate, mes amis. They murdered Sir Alister to protect a secret, not about theft or jealousy over rare orchids, but about the fraudulent nature of his collection. When Miss Hartwell discovered this deception and threatened to expose it, she too had to be silenced." He held up the journal triumphantly. "But in their haste, the murderer has made a crucial error. This book contains the answer, though not in the way anyone expects. The truth lies not merely in what is written, but in what has been carefully erased, and in who had the knowledge and opportunity to create such elaborate deceptions." Inspector Hartwell looked bewildered. "But what does this change? The fraud was Sir Alister's crime, not the killer's." "Au contraire, Inspector. Consider the expertise required to create convincing hybrid orchids, to forge provenance documents, to maintain such an elaborate deception for years." Sir Alistair was a passionate collector, but he was not a master forger. Someone else possessed those skills. Someone who worked closely with him, someone who understood both the scientific and administrative aspects of his collection. The psychological net was tightening around the true culprit, and with 2 murders now laid at their door, the stakes had become deadly indeed. The killer had revealed themselves through their very desperation to remain hidden, and Poirot's little grey cells were rapidly assembling the final pieces of this most complex puzzle. Time was running short, for if the pattern held, the murderer might well strike again to protect their terrible secret. The morning after Miss Hartwell's murder found Poirot sequestered in the conservatory, examining every surface with the intensity of a man reading scripture. The humid air seemed to whisper secrets as he moved between the orchid benches, occasionally pausing to study a particular bloom through his magnifying glass. "Hastings," he called suddenly, kneeling beside the eastern door, "observe this lock mechanism most carefully." He produced his magnifying glass, focusing on the brass interior. "You see these minute scratches? Fresh ones, made within the past week. Someone has practiced manipulating this lock from the outside. A thin wire inserted through the keyhole, turned just so. The door appears locked from within, yet was secured from without. But who would know such techniques? Someone with time, patience, and intimate knowledge of every mechanism in this house. Someone who had handled these keys daily for years." His eyes gleamed. "But that is not the most significant discovery." He led me to the shattered remains of the Pembroke Blues display case. "Notice the soil scattered here, Hastings. I collected samples yesterday." He produced a small envelope. "This earth contains crushed limestone, the preferred medium for Paphiopedilum orchids. Yet the Pembroke Blue was supposedly an epiphytic hybrid requiring only bark and moss. Limestone would kill such a plant. The implication struck me like lightning. The plant that was destroyed was not the Pembroke Blue at all, but a common slipper orchid placed there as a decoy. The real masterpiece was moved before the murder, preserved while its substitute provided the theatrical destruction our killer required." Poirot straightened, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We have assumed Sir Alistair was perpetrating fraud. But what if he was its victim? What if he discovered his collection was being systematically replaced with inferior specimens, the originals sold abroad for vast profit?" He produced a crumpled receipt from his pocket. This I found wedged behind the heating pipes, a sale document for a rare cattleya, written in Miss Hartwell's hand, recording a transaction between Blackwood and an unnamed buyer 3 weeks ago. Miss Hartwell was documenting the thefts? None, she was orchestrating them. But someone discovered her scheme and used it to frame her posthumously. He paused dramatically. "Inspector Hartwell has agreed to release Mr. Blackwood. The poor man's suffering has convinced me of his innocence. Guilt rarely produces such genuine anguish." From his waistcoat, Poirot withdrew a telegram receipt. "This final piece I discovered in Miss Hartwell's wastepaper basket. To H. Vandermeer, Amsterdam. Shipment delayed. Complications will resolve." Amsterdam, Hastings, the heart of Europe's flower trade. He checked his pocket watch with characteristic precision. "The killer grows desperate, having murdered twice to protect their secret, but in their haste they have left me the signature I required, not among the flowers, as I first thought, but in the very methods they employed. Tonight we shall gather everyone in the drawing-room, for I, Hercule Poirot, am finally ready to reveal the complete truth behind these perfumed murders." The trap was set, and the killer's desperate game was nearly at an end. The release of Geoffrey Blackwood sent ripples of unease through Thornfield Manor. No longer could the household comfort themselves with the illusion that justice had been served. The true killer walked among them still, and that knowledge poisoned every glance, every whispered conversation. Poirot spent the morning in methodical examination of evidence, his keen eyes missing nothing. In the conservatory, he demonstrated to Inspector Hartwell how a thin wire, inserted through the keyhole and manipulated with surgical precision, could turn the lock mechanism from outside while leaving the key in place within. "Voyez-vous, Inspector," he explained. "The scratches on the brass are fresh, made by someone practicing this technique repeatedly. This was no crime of passion, but a carefully rehearsed performance." The psychological pressure. By afternoon, Poirot had assembled the remaining suspects in the morning room. The atmosphere crackled with barely contained tension as he positioned himself before the window, his silhouette sharp against the grey Devon sky. "Mes amis," he began softly, "I have made several discoveries that cast new light upon these murders. The soil analysis confirms that the destroyed orchid was not the Pembroke blue, but a common slipper orchid planted in limestone, a substance that would kill the true specimen. The real masterpiece was removed before the murder, preserved for sale to European collectors." Lady Pembroke Thorne's composure finally cracked. "You're saying Alistair's collection was being systematically stolen?" "For years, madame. Miss Hartwell kept meticulous records of these transactions. But she was not the mastermind, merely the bookkeeper for a far more sophisticated operation." Julian's hand trembled as he reached for his cigarette case. "Then who? Someone with the botanical expertise to create convincing substitutes," Poirot continued, his gaze moving deliberately from face to face. "Someone with the scientific credentials to authenticate specimens for foreign buyers. Someone who understood every mechanism in this house intimately enough to stage an impossible murder." Dr. Thornbury's habitual composure began to show hairline cracks. "Surely you're not suggesting—" "I suggest nothing yet, Doctor, but I observe much. The wire found in your medical bag, the limestone soil on your shoes despite claiming you never entered the growing areas, and the telegram to Amsterdam found in Miss Hartwell's wastebasket, written on paper from your notebook." The silence was deafening. Each suspect felt the weight of Poirot's scrutiny, but it was Dr. Thornbury who seemed to shrink beneath that penetrating gaze. The final setup. Poirot straightened, his voice taking on the formal tone that always preceded his greatest revelations. "This evening we shall gather in the drawing room for the final act of this tragedy. I shall present the complete solution to these perfumed murders, how they were committed, why they were necessary, and by whom they were orchestrated." He moved toward the door with characteristic precision, then paused. "The killer believes their deception remains intact. They are mistaken. Tonight the truth will bloom at last, and justice will be served." The psychological net had tightened to its breaking point. Tomorrow would bring the final reckoning. The drawing room at Thornfield Manor had been transformed into a theatre of judgment. Heavy velvet curtains shut out the March evening, while firelight cast restless shadows across ancestral portraits that seemed to watch with grim anticipation. Poirot had arranged the chairs with mathematical precision, Lady Pembroke Thorne rigid in her mourning dress, Julian pale and clutching an untouched whiskey, Geoffrey Blackwood still shaken from his wrongful imprisonment, and Dr. Thornbury polishing his spectacles with increasingly agitated movements. Inspector Hartwell stood sentinel by the door, his earlier confidence replaced by wary respect for the Belgian detective's methods. And even the household staff had been summoned, Mrs. Meadows, Griggs the gardener, and Henderson the butler, all bearing witness to this final act. Poirot positioned himself before the marble mantelpiece, his small figure immaculate despite the day's revelations, his magnificent mustache perfectly groomed. "Mes amis," he began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room, "we gather to solve a puzzle most complex. 2 lives have been taken through calculated murder. The police arrested an innocent man. The true killer has walked among you, confident in their cleverness." He began his characteristic pace, hands clasped behind his back. This appeared to be an impossible crime, a locked room, no escape, evidence pointing to Mr. Blackwood. Yet the little grey cells knew something was wrong. The psychology was incorrect. The staging too perfect, too theatrical. "Get on with it," Julian muttered hoarsely. "Who killed my father?" "Patience, monsieur. To understand the murder, we must understand the motive. This was not about jealousy over rare orchids, nor inheritance, nor professional rivalry. This was about money, vast sums earned through systematic fraud." Dr. Thornbury's hands stilled on his spectacles. "I don't see what—" "Everything, Doctor." Poirot's eyes fixed upon him with laser precision. "For years, someone replaced Sir Alistair's rare specimens with clever forgeries, selling originals to European collectors. Miss Hartwell kept records but lacked botanical expertise to create convincing substitutes. She needed a partner, someone with impeccable scientific credentials, someone who could authenticate forgeries for buyers." The room contracted around Dr. Thornbury as every gaze turned toward him. Sir Alistair discovered the deception. He began questioning provenance, examining specimens too closely. The threatening letters were not sent to him. They were drafts of accusations he planned to make public. He confronted his betrayer, and for that discovery, he died. "This is preposterous," Thornbury exploded, his composure finally cracking. "You have no proof." Poirot smiled that enigmatic smile that always preceded his greatest triumphs. "Au contraire, Doctor. I have all the proof required. The wire found in your medical bag, the limestone soil on your shoes, the telegram to Amsterdam written on your notebook paper. But more than evidence, I have the psychology." He paused dramatically, savoring the moment. "And now I shall demonstrate exactly how you committed these perfect murders." The trap had closed at last. The drawing room at Thornfield Manor had become a crucible of truth, the firelight casting dancing shadows across faces taut with anticipation. Poirot stood before the assembled company like a conductor preparing his orchestra for the final movement of a complex symphony. "Mes amis," he began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "we have witnessed not one crime, but a carefully orchestrated campaign of deception spanning 5 years. Dr. Marcus Thornbury, you are a murderer twice over, but your greatest crime was the systematic betrayal of a man who trusted you implicitly." Dr. Thornbury's hands trembled as he polished his spectacles with mechanical precision. "This is preposterous, and I am a fellow of the Royal Horticultural Society." "You are a thief and a killer," Poirot interrupted, his tone cutting like a blade. "Let me demonstrate exactly how you committed these perfumed murders." The method unveiled. Poirot began his characteristic pace, each step measured and deliberate. "For years, you and Miss Hartwell operated a sophisticated fraud. Using your botanical expertise, you created hybrid substitutes for Sir Alistair's rarest specimens, selling the originals through Dutch brokers to private collectors. The profits were substantial. Over £50,000 according to the Amsterdam bank records Inspector Hartwell has obtained." He paused before Dr. Thornbury, whose face had gone the colour of old parchment. Sir Alistair began to suspect. He noticed discrepancies. A petal shape wrong here, and a growth pattern inconsistent there. The threatening letters found in his papers were not sent to him, but were drafts of accusations he planned to make public. He had scheduled a meeting with the Royal Horticultural Society for the Monday following his death. Lady Pembroke Thorne pressed a handkerchief to her lips. "He said nothing to me. He wished to be certain before destroying a colleague's reputation. That nobility cost him his life." Poirot's voice hardened. "On the fatal evening, you arrived early under the pretext of reviewing acquisition records. At precisely 10:15 p.m., you adjusted the conservatory temperature controls, lowering them dramatically. You knew Sir Alistair's habits intimately. He would rush to protect his children the moment he discovered the temperature fluctuation." Julian leaned forward, but his earlier bravado entirely vanished. "But how did you get him to drink the poison?" "Simplicity, ma'am. You waited in the conservatory, having already prepared the cyanide solution, readily available from the pest control supplies. When Sir Alistair arrived at 10:30 p.m. carrying his evening brandy, you approached him as a trusted colleague, offering to assess the temperature damage together. In his distraction over the threatened plants, you switched his glass for the poisoned one. Poirot mimed the action with delicate precision. The cyanide acted within moments. Sir Alistair collapsed, and in his death throes, he destroyed the substitute Pembroke Blue, not in vandalism, but as a final desperate signal that something was wrong with his collection. The limestone soil scattered across the floor told the tale. No true epiphytic orchid could survive in such medium. The locked rooms tours. Solved. Inspector Hartwell stepped forward, his earlier confusion replaced by grim understanding. But the locked doors, Poirot, both were secured from within. Ah, oui, the theatrical masterpiece that nearly succeeded. Poirot produced a thin wire from his waistcoat. After Sir Alistair died, you arranged the scene carefully, destroying the substitute orchid completely, positioning the body, ensuring the brandy glass was prominently displayed. Then you departed through the eastern door, locking it normally behind you. He demonstrated with the wire, inserting it through an imaginary keyhole. Later that night, you returned from outside. Using this technique you had practiced repeatedly, note the fresh scratches on the lock mechanism. You manipulated the eastern door's key through the keyhole, turning it to lock the door from within while standing outside. And the western door, Hartwell pressed. That, Inspector, was your masterstroke of misdirection. The western door was never locked from inside at all. You simply removed the key entirely and pocketed it, leaving the door to appear locked when in fact it was merely closed. When we discovered the body, you were among the first to arrive, and in the confusion, you simply slipped the key back into the lock from inside, creating the illusion it had been there all along. Geoffrey Blackwood's face darkened with understanding. And you planted my old key to frame me. Précisément. A key you had reported lost years ago, as which you had actually stolen during one of your consultations at his estate. The perfect scapegoat. A jealous rival with apparent access to the murder scene. The documentary evidence, Poirot, produced a manila folder from his jacket. But you made crucial errors, Doctor. This receipt from H. Vandermeer in Amsterdam was found not in Miss Hartwell's papers, but sewn into the lining of your medical bag. It details the sale of a genuine Cattleya orchid for £1,200, authenticated by your signature. Dr. Thornbury lurched to his feet. That proves nothing. Medical bags are often repaired. By coincidence, using thread that matches the repairs on Miss Hartwell's notebooks? Poirot's smile was razor-sharp. The same thread found in your hotel room, Doctor. You attempted to plant evidence posthumously, but your needlework betrayed you. He opened the folder, revealing a sheaf of documents. Bank transfers to your personal account in Switzerland. Correspondence with Dutch dealers. Shipping manifests for rare specimens. The Amsterdam authorities have been most cooperative. They raided Vandermeer's establishment yesterday and found 14 orchids bearing forged provenance documents in your handwriting. The second murder, Poirot's voice softened as he addressed Miss Hartwell's death. Your partner grew frightened after Sir Alistair's murder. She possessed the detailed records of your transactions, your forgeries, your sales. Perhaps she threatened to confess, perhaps she demanded a larger share of the profits. Either way, she became a liability you could not afford. You invited her to the conservatory for an early morning meeting, and offering her tea to calm her nerves, tea laced with the same cyanide that had killed Sir Alistair. The journal she clutched in death was your final misdirection, planted to suggest she had discovered Sir Alistair's supposed fraud rather than your systematic theft. The psychological breakdown. The accumulated weight of evidence had finally shattered Dr. Thornbury's composure entirely. His professional mask crumbled, revealing the desperate criminal beneath. He was going to destroy everything, Thornbury cried, his voice breaking. 30 years of reputation, a lifetime of scientific achievement, all ruined because he noticed a petal was the wrong shade of blue. I had no choice. He would have exposed us all. You had every choice, Poirot replied coldly. You chose greed over honor, murder over confession, and in doing so, you destroyed not only two innocent lives, but the very scientific integrity you claimed to protect. Inspector Hartwell stepped forward with his constables. Dr. Marcus Thornbury, I arrest you for the murders of Sir Alistair Pembroke Thorne and Miss Evelyn Hartwell. As the handcuffs clicked shut around the broken man's wrists, Poirot watched with a mixture of satisfaction and profound sadness. The puzzle was solved, the deception unmasked, but the cost in human life remained a tragedy that no amount of brilliant deduction could undo. Voila, he murmured to himself as Thornbury was led away. The little grey cells have done their work. But in this perfumed chamber of death, even victory carries the bitter scent of mortality. The revelation was complete. Justice served, yet the orchids in their glass prison continued their silent bloom, indifferent to the human drama that had played out among their exotic petals. The grey morning that followed Dr. Thornbury's arrest brought a peculiar stillness to Thornfield Manor, as though the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath through days of terror. The blue lights of police vehicles had vanished into the Devon mist, taking with them the architect of so much misery. Poirot and I stood in the conservatory one final time, surrounded by the exotic blooms that had witnessed such tragedy. The orchids continued their silent existence, beautiful and indifferent to the human drama that had unfolded among their petals. "It is finished, Hastings," Poirot said quietly, examining a delicate cattleyas with gentle appreciation. "Dr. Thornbury has confessed fully during the night. 53 rare orchids replaced over 5 years, with sales totaling nearly £70,000, and a network of European collectors who unknowingly purchased stolen specimens. The aftermath, Lady Pembroke Thorne had announced her intention to donate the entire collection to Kew Gardens. Perhaps now I can mourn Alistair properly, she had told us, without the orchids watching. Let them serve science honestly, as he would have wanted. Julian, sobered by proximity to death and the revelation of his father's genuine achievements, had sworn off gambling entirely. "Father died defending his integrity," he said, his voice steady for the first time in years. "Perhaps it's time I found something worth defending myself." Geoffrey Blackwood, exonerated and bearing no grudge, had shaken Poirot's hand warmly. "You saved my life and reputation, although I suspect I shall stick to roses henceforth. Orchids have become rather too spirited for my taste." Poirot's reflection. As our motorcar pulled away from the manor, I glanced back at the great glass conservatory gleaming in the morning light. "Tell me, Poirot," I said, "what truly solved this case for you?" Poirot adjusted his muffler with characteristic precision. "The limestone soil, mon ami. It was an offense against botanical truth. An epiphytic orchid cannot survive in limestone. Dr. Thornbury saw the Pembroke blue not as a living thing of beauty, but as currency. He cared nothing for its needs, only its value. And Sir Alistair, did he know at the end? Oui, Hastings. In those final moments, he understood everything. That is why he destroyed the false orchid and scattered the limestone, not in madness, but as a dying message. So with his last conscious act, he ensured his killer would not escape justice." The final word. As London's skyline appeared on the horizon, Poirot settled back with a satisfied sigh. "You comprehend now why this case fascinated me so. It was not merely murder, but the corruption of beauty itself. Dr. Thornbury made wrong choices, each easier than the last, until murder seemed merely another step in preserving his comfortable deception. Yet justice has been served. Oui, but justice cannot restore life. It can only ensure that death does not go unpunished and that truth triumphs over deception." He smiled that enigmatic smile. "The orchids were magnificent, it is true, but I find myself longing for simpler cultivation. My vegetable marrows require no provenance documents and inspire no murders. There is much to be said for the humble zucchini. With that characteristic touch of philosophy, Hercule Poirot closed his eyes, his little grey cells finally at rest. The affair at the Orchid Room was concluded. Another triumph of method over chaos, truth over deception, and the enduring power of human conscience over the darker impulses that lurk in even the most cultivated gardens.